on this episode of Common Denominator.
I mean, I think it's a story that you tell yourself. If you tell yourself this divorce is terrible and it's like a death, then it's going to be terrible and feel like a death. But if you tell yourself, wow, I am empowered enough to know what works for me and what doesn't, and now I have this opportunity to create a life I love, then you're reframing the narrative.
This is Common Denominator, straight-up conversations with Moshe Popak. Relying on critical thinking and open-spirited debate, we invite you to find common ground on everyday issues and encourage you to be bold, to be optimistic, and to take action. To learn more, head to moshepopak.com, and we'd be so grateful if you'd like, share, and subscribe to the show. Now, here's your host, Moshe Popak.
Hi, and welcome to the show. This week, finding common ground on divorce and co-parenting. My guest is Michelle Dempsey-Multack, a certified co-parenting specialist and the author of the new book, Moms Moving On. Divorce can feel overwhelming and hopeless, especially when children are involved. But, according to Michelle, that doesn't have to be the case. In fact, it's often the opposite. Michelle, welcome to Common Denominator. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Michelle, why do you think divorce is sometimes the best solution for the parents and the kids?
Every divorce and every marriage has its own unique and complicated issues, but I think what it boils down to is if you have two people who have grown apart and cannot find their way back together, or one person who has just decided this isn't the marriage for them, or you've done enough soul searching to realize that you've committed yourself to the wrong person, then it's always the right decision. Like I have never believed that, you can't make a change just because it violates society's standards of like what the norm is. And so maybe that's why I have become this disruptor in the divorce world. But it's really unfair to take, somebody and in one stage of their lives and then expect them to grow through each stage without having a change of heart. So you're allowed that change, and I'm not a proponent for divorce at all, but I am a proponent for leaving if you have to and finding the life that you deserve.
So I want to go to a stat that I saw. Out of 127 million households in the U.S., so it's not, you were saying it's the commonality, but out of 127 million households, the typical 50 years ago, the narrative, it would be 60% was husband, wife, child.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it's only 18%. So the narrative of let's get married for life seems to have changed.
And also the narrative of let's get married has changed. Like I know many couples who are partners and they're together, but they don't formally get married for one reason or another. I think families look a lot different now than they looked 50 years ago. And thank God, because the world has changed. I wrote in my new book, I have statistics about the amount of co-parented children and single moms. And, I know married people who live in two separate homes to preserve their sanity and stay married. And
Sure.
things just look differently now than they do then because we have so many more options available to us now than we did then.
Wait. So you're saying that married people sleep in different houses? Because I actually did see something where they're making two suites in the same home.
Oh, yeah.
But I've never heard that married couples actually have two different homes.
I know of a couple who one lives in the marital home, the other got an apartment on the beach, and they spend their nights and weekends together, but then they're separate when they want to be, and they've been married like 40 years. Listen, it's not traditional. And then of course, not for nothing, when my husband falls asleep on the couch, like I have a much better night's sleep when I sleep on myself. So I totally understand why they slept in separate beds back in the day, but I hear that a lot. And I think it really just comes down to knowing who you are as a couple and what you need versus like, oh, but like if we sleep in separate beds, is that bad? Like, who cares? You're still a partnership. You're still like going through life together. You know, it's not all a one size fits all. At least have like two different sinks in your bathroom. That saves a lot of drama.
Yeah. How do we reframe. I always like the concept of reframing. How do we reframe that? It's not just a stigma and an emotional tolling. The concept of getting divorced. What would be kind of tools to reframe that?
I mean, I think it's a story that you tell yourself. If you tell yourself this divorce is terrible and it's like a death, then it's going to be terrible and feel like a death. But if you tell yourself, wow, I am empowered enough to know what works for me and what doesn't, and now I have this opportunity to create a life I love, then you're reframing the narrative and you're kind of shifting the perspective of divorce on its head, that it's this terrible, sad thing. Maybe for one of the two people, or maybe for neither of the two people. Maybe it's what both people need to be able to thrive and live healthy lives.
How do we basically deal with the family dynamic when we're going through divorce? What is practical tools? So let's say a husband and wife decide they're going to get divorced. What's kind of a practical tools that if there's children involved? What are kind of steps that we can use?
So something that makes me so sad is when there are children involved and the divorce is high conflict or there's a lot of animosity, and then the families turn on their daughter or son-in-law. For me, like, it's so unfair to the children, right? Because just because the two parents decided not to live together doesn't mean that the grandparents are any less important or shouldn't still hold a special place in their lives. And it's up to the adults in the situation to reach out and say, hey, ex-mother-in-law, even if you never really liked her much, it's important to me that Susie still has her grandma in her life. And I just want you to know that you're still going to be respected and viewed in such a way. I don't necessarily think it has to be this like dissolving of all sorts of family ties and relationships. You are uncoupling, but you don't have to completely throw everyone in your circles away. But that comes with a sense of emotional maturity too. Like, I have so many clients who will say, my in-laws hate me now and they refuse to come see the kids because they're so mad at me for making this choice. And they're really spiting themselves in that case. It's terrible.
And I think, I'm married 17 years, 10 children, definitely been a journey. And I say I'm probably married to the same woman 4 times. And I've said that on my show a couple times. And to your point, I think we journey through and we change and we have to recognize that. But I think people deciding, even going into a marriage, the narrative is we always see it's supposed to be a Disney movie and kind of managing our expectation going in. That actually it's, kind of the way I see it is that it should be more thought out. It's the same energy. For example, the same energy you put into business, the same energy you put into your marriage between husband and wife, and the same energy you put into your children, right?
Yeah.
It's work. And we shouldn't just be, I got married and everything's going to be, the other person's going to make me happy.
Oh, that's the biggest misconception, right? And I think also, it's different now, but even when I'm in my late 30s, and when I was in my early 20s, I had friends who were starting to get married and settle down. And culturally, I know, that you're married right out of college in a lot of cultures. You don't know yourself. And you're kind of told to like pick the husband that's great on paper, right? Like for me, he's Jewish, he's a lawyer. Great. Like, what else do you need? Like, that's the total package. And you think like, well, we have these wonderful qualities, right? So like, what can go wrong? And you don't take a step back and say, okay, but what are my values and what do I need in a relationship? And despite his good job and his religion, what's going to be there to bring me security, a sense of security, and know that this person has my back and is loyal. And we overlook those things. And these are the things, you learn the hard way. You either get married young and everything's great and you can be emotionally evolved enough to be with the same woman 4 different times, or it drives people away from each other when they start to realize their differences, their deeper differences. It's hard. They say men marry a woman hoping she won't change, and women marry a man hoping he will. And that's not real life.
And what, in other words, I do believe that a married couple, most of the time, before they decide to get divorced, try everything that they possibly
Everything.
can. Everything.
Yes.
That is the truth. And what would be the end? Like, this is the catalyst. You know what? We're throwing in the towel.
First of all, I'm a big believer in trying to. I've had a handful of clients who I've said to them, like, listen, I know you think you want to get divorced, but you're not there yet. Like, you still have work here. There's still work that can be done. My mom gave me the best advice. I'm also a child of divorce, and my parents had a horrible marriage. But my mom said, Michelle, you don't want to lay your head down on your pillow at night thinking that there was something more you could have done. You want to try everything. And I am a big fan of that. But then, okay, so you decide to go to marriage counseling and you get there because you can't believe your spouse did that thing to you. And then you get to marriage counseling and that person is not taking any personal responsibility. Oh, well, that's because, of you. And there's gaslighting and there's this, lack of self-awareness that you're like, what is going on? I think when you are trying so hard to make it work and one person refuses to take responsibility for their role, right? Because it takes two to tango, then you kind of have to take a step back and say, okay, this isn't working. But if you have two people who are committed to loving each other and working through this issue, and I believe marriages can rebound from infidelity, I see it all the time.
Sure.
It takes two and two people who are willing to do the work. But in a lot of cases, you have someone who is just unable to take personal responsibility, and that's a very difficult person to be married to. And the other case where I think it's not worth sticking it out and trying is, or like literally skipping marriage counseling and just getting out of there, is when there are issues of abuse, whether physical, sexual, emotional, or financial. That is not a healthy environment for you to be in, not a healthy environment to raise children in, because you're modeling for them what relationships should be. And if you're allowing abuse, obviously I don't have to tell you why that's bad. But aside from that, I mean, if you've got two people committed to working on it, it's worth a shot.
So, Michelle, I know you just mentioned about rebounding from infidelity. From a practical perspective, right, in society, you see, like, that seems impossible.
Right.
What are some practical tips how to deal with that?
I think you have to look at the situation for itself. If the person you're married to is carrying on like a double life with someone else, maybe that's not something trying to rebound from. That's pretty hurtful and disloyal. But if somebody has a slip up, let's say, and they come clean to you about it and they feel horrible and they can't believe they let that happen, there's a level of accountability there. And that's something you can work with. Then you can say, okay, why did this happen? Was it, the children are just stressing us out so much we've disconnected? Or am I not able to fulfill you in a certain way? How can we fix that? And it takes a really big person to be able to look toward the future and not stay stuck in that one slip up that the person had. But it can be done, and I've seen it done.
And I know you mentioned before, and I share that with you, I also am a product of, as a child, I was 5 years old. My parents went through a tough divorce. And thinking back now, going into my marriage, seemingly things that I should have known going into my marriage, I was like a little baby, like a little child. What are some tips, in other words, for listeners that their parents went through a tough divorce? What would you advise them going into their marriage?
Very simply put, go to therapy.
Right.
I had so many unresolved issues that I didn't even know about that were deep in there. If you were the product of a high conflict divorce like I was, you had your own level of trauma and that stays with you. And these core beliefs that you have about yourself and marriage and relationships, that hits you and that sticks with you between the ages of 0 and 5. So if you were in that formative time in your life and there was chaos, it's going to come back to bite you somewhere. And so you have to go to therapy and really get to know yourself, because chances are, if you are the product of divorce, you lean towards more of an anxious attachment style. You want to be with somebody, you want to make them happy, you want them to love you,
Correct.
you'd rather not be alone. And then you're sort of kind of ignoring your own needs. And then you perpetuate this cycle where somebody's deeply unfulfilled and resentful. So got to go to therapy. You got to know who you are. You got to know what you truly need in relationships. And sort of get behind the idea that what happened in your childhood does not have to be your reality, but it very will be if you don't heal a lot of the stuff you're bringing into the marriage.
Yeah, I know. I remember the first bunch of years of my marriage, anytime there would be some sort of even a low-level conflict, in my mind, it was always like, oh, does this mean we're going to get divorced? It was always so, right? So you laugh because
Yeah.
I assume it resonates with you, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Right? So it was like, but let's talk about strategies on co-parenting. So you
Mm-hmm.
decide to get divorced and you want to do it amicably, healthy. What are some strategies moving forward on co-parenting?
So it's kind of like the antithesis of what you have to do in the divorce process. When you go through the divorce process as adults, you have to depersonalize it, right? You have to take your emotion out of it and treat it like a business transaction. But when it comes to the children, you have to make it really personal and you have to make it about them. And there's a saying in the co-parenting world that you want to put the children at the center of your divorce, but not in the middle. And what that means is taking a step back from everything you think you feel and what's owed to you, and he did this and she did that, and what's going to be best for our kids? Can I sacrifice an extra day or so because I know my child would really love to be with her father? Absolutely, because that's what's best for her. But the problem is that when you're so emotional at the end of a marriage, you can't, it's hard to do that. So my advice is always like, just because you've separated, it doesn't mean there's a rush to getting divorced. If you rush the process and you make those decisions emotionally, you're not going to be making the best decisions from the co-parenting mindset. You're going to be making emotionally fueled decisions, and that's never good. Take some time, play around with your co-parenting schedules, see what works, see what the kids are responding to, see what feels comfortable for them, not for you. Don't look at this as like, oh, I don't want to go 3 days without seeing my child, when 3 days is a more consistent time than every other day with each parent. Take your time, see what works for your family. It's not a one size fits all model. And even if you're dealing with an unreasonable ex-spouse, the best thing you can do is be that one reasonable person in your child's life. Continue making child-centered decisions, even if your ex can't. You know, two balls of fire will not produce anything good, but if you can be the glass of water and your ex is the ball of fire, then your kids will be in a much better space.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I just want to also talk about the emotion and treating the process like a business. I was talking to a friend of mine. He's currently going through a divorce. Unfortunately, the way the system, the legal system, I call myself a recovering attorney, so
Yeah, okay.
don't practice. But in the end of the day, there's a natural, and I want to tell this to the audience because I think there's a natural conflict of interest because these lawyers and the judges, they all know each other. And the end of the day, what's actually practically happening is that you end up paying the college tuition for the lawyers, right? You want to fight and they get on your emotion and you're sensitive and drag it out 6 months, a year, 2 years, and it's $1 million before you know it.
Mhm.
So I just want to, from a practical
There are ways
finance,
around that, that
right?
doesn't have to be, we're in a space now where a lot of lawyers are being trained in collaborative law. And if you can find an attorney who maybe you don't want to have a collaborative divorce, but someone who understands how to proceed with the divorce in a collaborative way, you're less likely to find yourself in litigation. The biggest misconception is, oh, I'm getting divorced, I need a shark to go after my ex. No, you do not, because that's biting yourself and that's keeping yourself in court for way longer than you need to be there. And that's fighting over every little detail that's just not worth fighting over. You have to really sit down and have your non-negotiables. Okay, this is what I definitely need. These are the things that I'm not willing to fight over because it would be stupid. And here are the things that I don't even care about. And if you find yourself in a situation with an attorney who wants you to fight at every turn, please get a second opinion.
Right.
It's the most important thing you'll ever do.
My wife has a great line. He's like, you've decided at one point in life that you love each other. You end up getting married. It was good, right? Good enough to get married. Why can't you take a few weeks to, be adults and figure it out, right? It's like,
yeah. Well, if it were that easy,
I know. It's like,
this wouldn't be a whole industry.
I know, because it's a lot of emotion and it's really tough. I know, and
Yeah.
so, but also I've seen, single parents where one of the parents just completely not involved. what's the strategies that, for yourself emotionally and for your child or children, what are some strategies to deal with that?
Well, the first thing I think that that parent needs to do is take out the shame and the guilt of her life from not having the other person there to be a presence in their child's life. Harvard research shows that children only need one stable caregiver to thrive. And if you look at some of the most successful athletes and actors, they'll say, I owe it all to my mom. She was a single mom. So that shows you right there that children really only need one stable person to thrive. But the problem is that when you take on that full load of parenting by yourself, you're definitely not thriving. It's hard. I was a single mom for all of like 2.5 years before I got remarried. And oh my God, and I have one child. It's a lot. So for that, I say you can't be too proud. You have to know when to ask for help, when to call in a lifeline, when to throw your hands up and just say, screw it. This doesn't need to be perfect. It's okay if you take Cheetos for lunch today because I've had a day and I can't prepare another like cookie cutter little meal. You have to know your limits. You have to know when to ask for help. And you have to own the fact that like it's pretty amazing that you have the sole influence in this child's life. If their other parent were there and they were going to be a detriment to them, it's a blessing for you to step in that role and own it by yourself.
And I know top 50 podcasts on Apple, over 500,000 downloads. So obviously you're speaking to a great crowd on your podcast, Mom's Moving On, right? So
Thank you. Yeah.
So I guess this from your journey, right? I always say the hardest things end up being the biggest blessings in a way because of the
sure.
right, because of the things that you learned. In other words, I guess this is what it seems like. This is what you want to give back on.
Yes, 100%. This all started out of a need for what I didn't have when I got separated. I was 33. My daughter was 2. I would take her to preschool, and everybody was still pregnant and having babies, and they were happy. And I would go to, I remember it was like Passover 2 months after I got separated, and I'm like alone, and all my cousins are married, and I'm just like there with my daughter, and I remember that feeling of just like, I was happy to be getting divorced, but at the same time, like, God, this is isolating. So that's really where my whole brand was created, I guess, and it sort of happened by accident. But I just believe that if you make it through something and you can teach somebody else how to do the same thing, that's your duty in life. Like, what other job do we have than to help each other out through the dark times? Like if we've already been there, we can't keep that secret to ourselves. We have to help someone else do it. And that's I think the power in what I do and the authenticity behind what I do.
I commend you for that because I think that everybody should do that. That's common denominator. I know I had my own journey, and I said that I would. This is my charity. This is my way and my mission statement to empower people through stories of the commonality of humanity. So I commend you for that. And I know with the same name as your podcast, you also have a book, Mom's Moving On. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, here she is. I'm very excited. It is essentially, somebody called it the Bible for every divorcing mom, but I can equate it to what to expect when you're expecting for a mom going through divorce. It is a play-by-play of literally everything you will face from the minute you find yourself alone in your house after your marriage ends to when you start co-parenting and how to handle that, how to navigate the legal process, how to navigate your changing friendships. All of a sudden, people stop inviting you to dinners because you're the weird divorced person now. There is so much we go through, and I literally cover all of it. It's about 27 or 28 chapters. Everything from when you first get separated to when you are ready to take the next step into a new relationship.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant because I like that step by step. In other words, because we don't have a lot of abstract and people talking about different ideas, but actually what you went through and putting yourself out there step by step. What would you say is one or two of your kind of favorite ideas coming from the book?
Definitely the shift in perspective, like lemons to lemonade kind of mindset. Like, yes, this is your reality now, but you can still make it great. And helping a woman realize that having this blank slate to create the second adventure in her life is a really powerful thing. And the other, I think it helps people feel less alone during a really isolating time. It breaks down everything you can expect to go through into like tangible bits and pieces. And at the end of the day, it's uplifting. So, most of the divorce literature out there before I wrote this that I came across was either very rote and prescriptive, and it really spoke to the legalities, or it spoke to women who were empty nesters in their 40s and 50s. This is like an evergreen, something that you can pick up at any stage you're going through in the divorce process, and feel like you have somebody who's listening to you.
So on the flip side, so I appreciate that. I also spoke to, I have a few friends going through divorce, and they were saying if we can do the same thing for guys also, like kind of
it's so
groups,
needed.
So needed, yes. On the guy side too, they don't, right? I don't know.
So many men follow me, and they'll like write to me, and they'll be like, "I know your content's for women, but like I really need it too." And some guy, actually, this was one of the best messages I got. He was like, "I didn't realize, I don't know if I can curse on here, but like how much of an a-hole I was, and you really made me realize that, and I'm grateful that I found you, because like I needed to hear it from a woman's perspective, the kind of hell I was bringing into my ex-wife's life." And there needs to be a voice for the men. There are a few accounts that I love on social media. There's Divorced Over 40 is run by a man named Daniel Herold, and he created this amazing community for both men and women. There is Single Dad Magic, who's amazing. And there are like little accounts here and there. Jay Skibbins, he's a co-parenting coach. I love him. I just had him on my podcast. He is speaking from the dad perspective, but he's really a champion for good co-parenting, and that's where my heart is too.
Yeah, and I think, and it's probably even harder, I was thinking, because we're told as men, right, the narrative to be a rock, but actually there's a book called The Power of Vulnerability, and yes. I think, right, I love to cry, and I love to feel, and it's not just, the narrative of being happy, it's a narrative of the whole holistic, of all emotions, right? Mm-hmm. And to allow, men and women to feel everything. And then especially there's a lot of feelings going through divorce, right?
Yeah, and I think men kind of like get the rough end of the stick, right? Because, where society tells the women to be vulnerable and emotional, and men are supposed to just like carry on and not feel anything. But all of those feelings manifest into this like ego-driven hostility towards their ex-wife, because they don't know what else to do with the feelings. Like, women seek counseling and therapy and coaching and motivational quotes, and it's almost like there's still a stigma on men being able to do the same, and I think it's unfair.
Yeah, so I definitely appreciate you joining the show. How can people learn more about you and get your new book?
You can just Google Moms Moving On. The book will come right up. On Instagram, I'm the Michelle Dempsey. My podcast is also Moms Moving On, and my website is momsmovingon.com.
Thanks again, Michelle. We'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Common Denominator podcast. Join us next week for another inspiring, impactful, and empowering conversation. To learn more about Moshe, head to MoshePopak.com. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it. And we'd be grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the show.